Welcome back to This Week. Time now to get the views of our media and political experts. The former chair of the state Democratic Party and former U.S. Senate candidate Bob Mueller joins our group. Clint Brewer, editor of the Nashville City Paper, and News 2's contributing political analyst Steve Gill. Welcome, guys. What do you think? Is Governor Bredesen going to be the next HHS secretary?
I think he'd be a good choice, but I don't think he's going to be the choice. I think Jennifer Granholm in Michigan seems to be catching some fire, and Kathleen Sebelius, the governor of Kansas. I think either of those two will probably end up being the pick.
I think he profiles well as a choice for Obama. He's a contrarian in terms of Obama's views. He's given the president a lot of grief during the campaign process, and Obama has gathered a lot of former foes to his administration. But in the end, I don't think he's going to be the choice.
I think they're probably both right. And if I had to absolutely place a bet, I think Governor Sebelius would probably be who I'd place the bet on.
But do you think that this is probably the closest maybe he has come to becoming a cabinet member? I think his name really was being bandied about this week.
I think Steve's right. I think he's in the final three. I really do.
I think it's the right choice mainly because he's a guy that both in the healthcare experience in the private sector, then as a governor having to deal with tough issues like TennCare, I think he brings that experience. I think he's also a guy that's had to govern in a state that is not necessarily unilaterally Democrat. So whoever goes in to start trying to reform health care is going to have to work on both sides of the aisle. Governor Bredesen has at least some of that capacity, and I'm not sure some of these others really offer that.
And he's a wonderful pragmatist. You know, he has his point of view, but he's pragmatic about it, and he understands how to make it happen. And there aren't many people who are that successful as he's been in this state.
Stimulus package in Washington is kind of stalled right now. Governor Bredesen has decided to withhold releasing his budget until March. I really think he probably has no choice, probably a smart move. So everything's kind of stalled. He's going to deliver his State of the State next week. What do you guys expect to hear from him?
Well, I expect to hear a dose of reality. I think he's going to set up what may happen regardless of the stimulus package, which is going to be a fairly draconian year in state politics in terms of, I think, probably budget reductions, job cuts. It may not be an outright budget reduction, but the rate of government may grow a lot less this year than it has in years past. And that stimulus money is going to be targeted largely, at infrastructure, which means there will be jobs. I don't know that that's going to mean state jobs.
It's going to be interesting. I'm, of course, anxious to see what metaphor he uses this year. He likes to use sailing. He likes to talk about these things in terms of metaphors, and I think that's actually helpful. And they know roughly how much money that they're going to get, but as Lieutenant Governor Ramsey said, the thing is they don't know what strings are going to be attached to it or where it's supposed to go, but they know they're going to get somewhere in the neighborhood of $3.9 to $4 billion additional money. So I imagine that we'll hear some generalities about where the budget's going to be, but no detail.
The problem is this papers over the problems, not just here, but as Governor Ramsey mentioned, out in California, where they're $40 billion in the hole. We're having to borrow this pork barrel spending money. It's not like we've got $900 billion sitting on a shelf that we're just going to go spend. We're borrowing, and that interest on the first 10 years alone is going to cost us more than $300 billion just in interest. Nobody thinks we're going to pay this back in the next 10 years. That's a debt we're going to pass on to generations of Americans. It ought to be pared down to the barest minimum of what will actually create the most jobs, and some of the stuff that's in here is just ridiculous.
President Obama wanted to have this stimulus package ready to go on Inauguration Day. They said that's not going to happen. You get it in February. We're in February. Now you have liberal Democrats over here, blue dog Democrats over here, the White House over here, Republicans over here. Not quite exactly bipartisan yet, are we?
Well, yeah, it's not bipartisan, and those great speeches don't always bring everybody together. I think that's what we're learning right now. Washington's a messy place. You heard a little frustration in the president's voice this week when he said, let's get past what goes on in this town and get some things done. But that's not going to happen. I think they're going to have to do some more arguing before they figure out what actually gets passed.
It's not just a matter of partisanship. It's a matter of the American people have figured out the trash that's in this pork barrel orgy. And the American people now are in a majority saying they don't want this deal. And I think that's what they're starting to look at. That's why they're saying we're going to pass this before the people figure out what else is in there.
And the trouble is that the American people have also seen what happened with that bailout package, where a good bit of it was misspent. And during the campaign, I tried to make something of that it was not being responsibly offered. So So I think President Obama he would prefer to have, I believe, a much barer bones bill. And I think you spoke with Congressman Cooper about that, and now he's been taken to the woodshed a little bit. But truth of the matter is, I think what he said is right in the sense that this bill needs to get at what the problem is. And unfortunately, the Congress, both parties, seem to view these kinds of omnibus bills as opportunities to add on, and it's too bad.
The House passed an $800 billion pork barrel spending side. Then it goes over to the Senate where they're going to cut it back and reduce it and bring some common sense. It grows to $919 billion.
As good a communicator as President Obama was during the campaign, and he hasn't been able to communicate this particular item very well, and as flawless as the campaign, this has been a real mess. And frustration, as you said, we've heard from the past, he's told people, clean this thing up, but it hasn't happened yet.
Well, and that's the problem. He can't get the leaders in his own party to go along with the spirit of what he's trying to do. And that's, Nancy Pelosi, and that's Harry Reid. I mean, they're just not bringing their people in line, and they're kowtowing to the culture of Washington and the culture of the Congress, and they're not really respecting what Obama said he wanted to do when he came into office, which, quite frankly, is a lot closer to what Jim Cooper said ought to be done.
Do you think at some point, though, we're getting closer next week or so, something will pass in Washington?
I think so.
Yeah, they'll pass something.
Yeah. They have to. They have to. And since everybody's taken shots at Democrats, it disappoints me that the Republicans have chosen to be purely contrarian so far. I think that's going to end. I think there's going to be some Republican senators that are going to add some good to this Senate version, and it'll wind up at the end of the day being a little bit more nonpartisan than it's been so far. But it makes me think of Otto von Bismarck, who said there's two things you never want to see: how they make sausage and how they make laws.
10 seconds.
Well, to Bob's point, why we're all blaming the Democrats, they're in charge of the House, the Senate, and the White House, Bob. It's all them. They don't need a single Republican vote to pass this trash.
Steve Gill, Clint Brewer, and Bob Tuke, appreciate your insight. Stay with us. This week continues in a moment.